Hello, everyone, and thank you for listening. So, there is so much worry behind what just happened. This article, I'm going to read it off the top because a lot of people, these are some of the things that I know people are worried about. People are worried that there's going to be another full blown war. People already feel we're already at war, having to do with the attack on the Iranian general. So here's a question here. In the world, Associated Press, was the drone attack on an Iranian general an assassination? And so a lot of people are worried that the people that are at the top making all these decisions are putting regular local civilian Americans at risk for possible destruction because of decision making at the top, in which we have nothing to do with. And we, as regular Americans, just people living their everyday life here in America, going on about their everyday business, are often the casualties. And the people who are wealthy and they have money, they can find a way to protect their families and their belongings themselves and somehow go into hiding. Some of the people who are at the top making the decisions, they have a safety net if there is a full-blown war. So a lot of people are really concerned about these decision makings that can put a lot of lives, innocent lives, that is, American lives, at risk. Now, yesterday I was reading, or should I say early this morning, that there was, for this Iranian general that has been killed, the people that were in Iran that went to, I believe, I don't know if it was his funeral, it was a funeral procession of some sort, were chanting death to Americans in their Iranian language. And so that is what has got everybody in an uproar and in a worried state on pins and needles as to the decision making and why this whole thing happened. So I'm going to read this article so we can see a little bit more insight as to what this question is proposed and what types of views come out in this article, because you can only form your own opinions as to what you think may or may not have happened. But it says, was the drone attack on the Iranian general an assassination? And so this was the Iranian general that was recently killed, just recent. And here it says, in this September 18, 2016 photo released by an official website of the Office of the Iranian Supreme Leader, Revolutionary Guard General. Okay, now I may not be able to pronounce his name correctly unless I hear other people say his name, but Qasem Soleimani. Qasem Soleimani. Okay, so center is a picture of him right here. He's the Iranian general, and it says he's attending a meeting with the supreme leader. Okay, and those names are pretty complicated to pronounce. But this was, he was attending a meeting, and Iran AUS airstrike near Baghdad airport, and there's more. Okay, so, and the words are really, really small, so I couldn't really see as much. But New York, out of the Associated Press, after Friday's targeted killing. Okay, so this happened just Friday, of an Iranian general, Qasem Soleimani. Okay, newsrooms struggled with the question, had the U.S. or the United States just carried out an assassination? And should news stories about the killing use that term? So this is pretty serious, on the serious side, especially from what some people have been tweeting. There's been a lot of concerns about this whole thing. So the AP style book considered a news industry Bible. And it defines assassination as the murder of a politically important or prominent individual by surprise attack. Okay? So although the U.S. or the United States and Iran have long been adversaries and engaged in a shadow war in the Middle East and elsewhere, the U.S. has never declared formal war on Iran. So the targeted killing of a high Iranian state and military official by surprise attack was clearly an assassination. So this is what they have come up with. And this was said by a Mary Ellen O'Connell, an expert in international law and the laws of war at the University of Notre Dame School of Law. So just as clearly, the Trump administration doesn't agree with that, of course. Though a statement issued by the Pentagon said that the attack was specifically intended to kill Soleimani, and that it was ordered and at the direction of the president. It also characterized the killing as defensive to protect U.S. military forces abroad and stated that Soleimani was actively developing plans to attack American diplomats and service members in Iraq and throughout the region. So subsequent statements by Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, President Donald Trump also characterized the killing as punishment of Soleimani for past blood on his hands. So that's pretty much the statements that have come from these people. So O'Connell's counter-argument, whether the killing is framed as part of the armed conflict between two states or as a police action intended to deter terrorism, it cannot be characterized as an act of self-defense because there was never a full-fledged and direct attack on the U.S. by Iran. The United States' legal reason for being in Iraq is to deter the Islamic State group, not to fight against Iran, she noted. And the attacks against the U.S. by Iranian-backed militias in recent months have been intermittent and relatively limited. So assassination is prohibited both in peacetime law as well as on the battlefield, she said. So we have really moved to a nearly lawless state, she said. If the justification for a military response is self-defense, the response should be necessary and proportionate. But that would not justify individual targeted killings, she said. So for Iranian, Soleimani's killing was a horrific assassination, wrote Majid Takht Ravanchi, Iran's ambassador to the United Nations. So, excuse me if I pronounce those names in the wrong phrase. It is an obvious example of the state's terrorism, and the criminal act constitutes a gross violation of fundamental principles of international law, Ravanchi wrote in a letter to the UN Secretary General. So the premeditated killing of a specific individual commander for what they have done on the battlefield or what they may have or has been prohibited by the law of armed conflict dating from Hague Convention or Hague Convention, I may not be pronouncing that correct, of 1907. So by the protocol of the Geneva Convention, 1949, saying it is prohibited to kill, injure, or capture an adversary by perfidy, She added, so international war law aside, there also has been a U.S. executive order in place since 1976 forbidding the U.S. from carrying out political assassinations. The order came into being after a revelation that the CIA had organized or sanctioned assassination attempts against foreign leaders, including Fidel Castro, or Fidel Castro as it or pronounced. So the current version of the executive order is no person employed by or acting on behalf of the U.S. government shall engage in or conspire to engage in assassination. So it does not, however, define or what constitutes an assassination and has been generally interpreted to mean an unlawful killing of the political leader in peacetime. So, for instance, during the War on Terror, since 9/11, the U.S. is believed to have conducted a number of secret drone strikes targeting individuals, such as attacks against Al Qaeda propagandists, and a war al-Awlaki, who was killed in 2011 in Yemen. And Soleimani, however, was a military leader if he was leading forces against the U.S. under the international laws of war as enunciated in the 1949 Geneva Conventions, and he and his forces could be considered legitimate battle targets during any actual war or armed conflict, declared or undeclared. So the Associated Press has mostly refrained from describing Soleimani's death as an assassination, both because it would require the news service to decide that the act was a murder, and because of the term is politically freighted. And so Duke University professor of law Madeline Morris, an expert on international criminal law, said that the law is not terribly clear in this area. So she said that under the United Nations Charter, there is a clear right of self-defense in response to armed attacks. So she noted that some might argue that the attacks the U.S. has experienced in the case do not meet at the threshold of gravity to justify this sort of targeted killing. So while others would argue, on the contrary, that there is no explicit threshold, that if attacked, a country has an absolute right to respond militarily. So there is no obligation to kill a lot of people rather than a single person, she said. So the question then would be whether the act of war was legal, allowed as a self-defense, or would it be considered as illegal act of aggression. So that would depend on the intelligence evidence offered by the U.S. and the imminency of any planned attack. So the problem is that governments have good reason to make very little public in this situation, which makes it very difficult to evaluate the situation politically or legally. And so there are 1,413 reactions based on this article alone, and there are probably a slew of other articles out there having to do with the debate around why this whole thing even occurred. And so this was the Iranian general that was killed during the drone attack. So, as they have allegedly wrote here, so I don't want to be in this, but we are Americans here, and so a lot of people are concerned. There's been a lot of tweets and a lot of people talking about this. This is a trending topic, and so what are your thoughts on this? This is one of those questions I propose is, what are your thoughts on this? Because was this a carried out assassination of this general, this Iranian general? Was it warranted that it should have happened because of the past history of being adversaries to the U.S. And other quarrels, things that have happened from before, prior, or the things that were happening? What are your thoughts and feedback on this? There's so many people that are responding to this, but I think the growing concern now is what happens next behind this, because there has been some videos, probably I would assume by now, and then there's been some anger with the people that are in that country who looked up to this Iranian general, and the chants. There was one article I was reading where they were in their language chanting "Death to Americans." And so this is not good at all. Having said that, thanks for listening. Don't forget to hit the like button.